Welcome back, my YouTube family. I hope you guys are all doing well. Today I have a special guest I'm interviewing. His name is Peter J. Law. He's a Marine Corps veteran. He recently graduated from Temple University with a bachelor's degree in psychology. And he is a wonderful strength performance coach that likes to tie in the mental aspect of training and pushing yourself within his coaching to make it more individualized, to make it better. And because of that, and because of the importance of our mentality when it comes to training and bettering ourselves, whether it is for sport or our influence on our life as a whole, I really thought it was going to be very beneficial to bring him on and give a bit of an expertise of his experience, background, and really how he trains and how he coaches with bringing that mental aspect to our physical and spiritual being in training. So anyways, I hope you guys enjoy the interview. If you want to see more videos like this, please like, subscribe, comment down below, and I appreciate it. Let's get to it. I went to go compete, try to set this world record. It was like drug tested, junior, 242. And the months leading up to that, it was like last November. The months leading up to that, I quit my job. I was doing only online training and powerlifting. And powerlifting, training wise, it's awesome, but you're only doing that, maybe 2 hours max for maybe 5 days a week, honestly. So the rest of my day, I'm doing a little bit of business work and a little bit. I felt very constricted as far as my training goes. It's like only squat, bench, and deadlift. Though my coach does allow for we do a lot of different stuff. But anyways, I went to go compete. I failed. I didn't get it. And then I felt like, oh shit, all my identity has just been wrapped up around this one thing. And then when you're branch out, and then I was like, oh, I can do other things, other avenues of training.
Yeah, for sure.
And then it's I felt more free, and I felt like my training in the big three actually got better. I just felt like I was getting strong overall, a little more happy too. Which I know you've changed your training up quite a bit, right? Mm-hmm. So you were doing powerlifting and now sprinting. Mm-hmm. What does that look like?
So, I guess if I went back a little bit, I've always kind of done different training. So I first fell into training when I was in the military. And then, through that, I was doing a lot of I don't want to say specific, but more general, I guess, preparedness work for military training. So because in the military, obviously, if you're a combat job or an infantry job, you're doing rucks, you're doing hikes. You have to carry a pack, a heavy pack on your back for a long time, and so that calls for a lot of general preparedness in different ways, where it's you should be strong, but you should also be conditioned. So then, kind of fast forward into when I got out. And I was kind of looking at my training goals. I was like, oh, you know what? I'm really not that strong. So I think maybe powerlifting could build that general base of just being stronger. So I did that for I don't know, maybe 2.5, 3 years, just specific powerlifting training work. And then after my last meet, and I'm by no means I was by no means a high level powerlifter. I was I guess relatively speaking to the general population, yeah, sure, I'm strong, but in the world of powerlifting, not really. But I looked at it, I was all right, my general strength levels have gotten to a point where now I feel confident in expressing my physicality in other ways and trying different things. So then probably a year ago, I started toying around with different training styles. I was toying around with ollie weightlifting for a little bit, just trying to learn the skill. And then I didn't really know that sprint training, you could just sign up for a meet and just do a meet. So I'm oh, that's kind of cool. And so I've been doing that for I guess the past 9-10 months now. And I have a meet this Saturday, and today's Tuesday?
Nice.
So I'm a few days out. I have absolutely no expectations whatsoever, but more so looking just to get that exposure to a new environment. And I think what you said too is huge, because I was so wrapped up in the powerlifting world for a little bit, where I was like autistic with like certain things where it's like, oh no, I remember like a few times where I was like, oh my God, no, like I like forgot my wrist wraps, like, oh, my bench is fucked. You know what I mean? And it's just like, dude, like, I don't know, like I have nothing against like the community of powerlifting, but I just feel like I got to a point where like for me it was almost like too specific, and people would probably like a lot of people would probably like would not like align with that idea. But like for me, I look at training and like kind of how you approach training, like I see it, especially in the past, like couple, like the past year, especially since I've been like exploring a lot of different ideas, is like, I think it actually is a good thing to be a little more like competent in like different areas that could also support that one thing if you wanted to like refocus on that.
Yeah.
So like with what you're doing, for example, right? It's like you were doing powerlifting for a while, and now you're kind of playing around with different things. Like I see you doing like strongman shit. I guarantee you, like a lot of that, if you wanted to go back into powerlifting, like specific powerlifting training, like a lot of that would carry over very well. That like you might not get with just core powerlifting training. And I think in general too, like I mean, we could expand upon this like later if you want, but I do think the more and the older I get in like training age, if you want to call it that, is like I kind of see training as like a very, it's like it's an expression of like being like, you can be very creative.
Yeah.
Like you don't have to stick to these super like arbitrary like rules in a sense. I'm not saying like you shouldn't like follow like the basics. Like I'm not saying like, oh, like progressive overload and progressive like overstimulus. Like, yeah, that's fucking dumb. Don't follow that. But I'm saying like,
but the principles of training and how you improve will always remain the same.
Yeah, for sure.
But the question is like, I guess in powerlifting, in both our circumstances, like you are now holding your success almost to the arbitrary numbers and rules of, you know, some other competition versus, I think one of your posts were talking about, you said something about like looking up to your own self as being like your own personal source of inspiration.
Yeah.
And how you were talking in that post, you were talking about sprint training and powerlifting and like doing multiple things. And you hear all this stuff about like hybrid athletes and that, but it's really just kind of being able to see that self-improvement on your own without necessarily always comparing yourself to a greater thing. Also, real quick, back on to like training in general. When I did a strongman meet a little bit ago, a couple years ago, and then I went back to powerlifting, all my numbers went up. Because I think that's more true GPP training, which is you're broadening your horizon of your capacity of actually physically being able to do stuff, instead of just kind of pigeonholing yourself. And GPP is not 4 sets of 6 on squats. It's more than that. But as far as training goes, were you always a very physical guy? Like, were you always like into sports, into maybe not lifting, but like into sports and physicality, and then because of that, you went into the Marines, or were you not so much, and the Marines kind of brought that out of you?
I'd say the latter might be the more true one. So like I grew up playing sports. Like I grew up like playing football, basketball, baseball, whatever, and I enjoyed like playing those sports, but like I got to a point where like I kind of realized like, okay, like I enjoy playing this, but it's not like doing it for me. Like it doesn't, like I don't seek a ton of enjoyment doing this. And my first kind of exposure to like training and like just becoming like a better, you know, prepared, you know, athlete, or, you know, whatever you want to call that. So it's around like my like junior year of high school where like I kind of realized like I enjoyed the weight training and like the conditioning aspect more than like the actual sport. And oh my God, it's kind of weird. But
what sport was it?
Football.
Football. Okay.
Yeah. And yeah, so I guess long story short, like my senior year, I was like, I don't really want to go to school and, you know, that kind of stuff. And I had always had an interest in joining the Marine Corps. And then I, you know, enlisted, did all that kind of stuff. And I went to boot camp and all that. And then while I was in, I kind of realized that's where like I found like a new appreciation and like love for like training as a whole, where it was like I was training all these like different qualities. Like, yeah, I'd go to the gym and like strength train, but I'd also do a lot of like calisthenics because like our PT test was very like, you know, we had to do a lot of pull-ups and like crunches and like we had this thing called a combat fitness test where it's like, it's kind of hard to explain without like showing like a video or whatever, but like it's pretty much like a short, like almost like, maybe not short, but like a 10-minute like HIIT workout where you're just like hauling ass with like a bunch of different shit. And I think through that, that's kind of where I found like this appreciation of like training and like just like forging myself through all these different qualities like as a whole for like, if you want to call it general preparedness.
Yeah.
And then like I was saying earlier, that's when I got out and I kind of realized like, okay, like I want to focus more on like the strength training specific stuff. Cause like I realized like, yeah, like I could probably be more stronger, and that would also like, that's a carryover to express different qualities better. Like a big thing I think about recently is like, when I had first started sprint training, like, yeah, my technique and everything was fucking garbage, but like I wasn't terribly slow. And I thank a lot of that to like my strength training. Cause like, it doesn't matter like how technically sound you are. And this could be for like powerlifting too, for example. It doesn't matter how technically sound you are or whatever, but like sometimes, or I would say honestly, like most of the time, it's never a weakness to always be stronger and want to be stronger. And I think also kind of like referring back to your question with like how my training has evolved is I look back a lot to like my military training, and like when I was doing powerlifting like specific training, at first I was like, oh yeah, I'm never fucking running again, fuck that shit. But then like the more I got like deeper into this rabbit hole of powerlifting, I'm like, oh, like I'm actually getting kind of bored.
Yeah.
Like just focusing on like 3 specific lifts and like the variations of that lift. And then in typical powerlifting fashion, if you want to call it, where like, not that I was like half-assing my accessories, but I feel like when I changed my training, like I actually put a lot more emphasis now on like my accessories.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't even call them accessories now. Like I like framing them as like just additional movements throughout my training day.
Yeah.
But
I think I just started like doing like Muay Thai, and I'm by no means very good at it. But looking at some other people who are probably a bit older than me and maybe have done powerlifting only for a little bit longer, they're a little more stiff in their movements. And even though I'm big, I'm like 250, I feel a little bit more fluid within the movement too. And I don't necessarily blame the powerlifting, but it's probably just if you only did that training for a very long time. My other thing too is I think people who tend to carry a lot of body fat on them, they just they don't move as well. So that it's interesting that you brought up that powerlifting and the strength you built there into the sprint training. How it's like, you feel awkward at first, but you're like, hey shit, I kind of have this. Like I'm like somewhat competent, as bad as I thought I was, which I had a similar experience doing that. Where was I going with that? But I did want to kind of talk about your education in school. So you got out of the Marines, and then you went to Temple, right? And then what have you been studying, and how do you kind of put that into what you do now?
So when I first got out, dude, I was all over the place. Like initially when I went to school, I actually wanted to go into like EMS and like the trauma nursing route because I was really into like the whole I guess like combat life support stuff I learned in the Marine Corps, where it's like you kind of learn how to treat like basic gunshot wounds or whatever it is. And I always found it very like really interesting. And when I went to school for it, the first like year, I was like, I don't think this is it. And I also like told myself too, my dude, like I don't want to put myself in a position where if I'm not all in, like on this profession, I don't want someone to rely on me with their life if I'm not all in on that profession. You know what I mean? And like, it didn't sit well with me. So I'm like, all right, I need to explore and kind of like, look at different paths, whatever. So I had thought about psychology, and the reason I went with psychology, I think a few influences. One being, when I first got out of the military, I was very like inclined to reading like certain philosophical texts. And I always really enjoyed the idea of like kind of learning about human behavior, but also like what's underneath like the surface of like everything. And then another reason I decided to study psychology is because I had a combat instructor my first year of the Marine Corps, and so when you go to combat school, you get these are all guys that have like been to war and like they've seen some crazy shit. And like I went to combat school in like 2015, and these guys have been in for like 12, 13 years plus. So they were all like Fallujah vets, like Iraq, like they went through some crazy shit. And the guy who was my like platoon instructor, he was fucking terrifying. Like he just looked like he killed a lot of people. But he was also very, very like well spoken, and he was very intelligent too, like very fucking smart. And I found out he had a master's degree in like psychoanalysis or something. So not only did he like kill a lot of people, but he was also like very, like he knew how to like read people, and he knew how to like all that crazy shit. And I'm like, dude, that's fucking sick. Like, and I looked up to that for a while, and that kind of led me to like what I wanted to do with psychology. And like originally with psychology, I didn't really like know I'd be doing what I'm kind of leaning into now. Because when I first started getting the field of psychology within like undergrad at least, it's very focused on like therapy and counseling, which like that's great, but that's not really like my true calling, maybe if you want to call it that. Where like it's just something I wasn't like super like interested in. Yeah. And then probably the last like 2 years of my psychology degree, that's where I learned like, oh, like if you think about it, like there's psychology in fucking everything, you know what I mean? And like that's where I kind of lean into the fact of like, oh, well, like I really want to do something with like coaching and like coaching strength and conditioning and like fitness and all that. There's a lot there with the psychology aspect, and it's become like a more growing field too with like the exercise and sports psychology. And that's what I'm going to get my master's in, is exercise psychology. And I just think I think it's a fascinating field, and I think it's very, I guess you could say upcoming, but it's also very like new. And that also, with that being said, that kind of leads to the problem of like, I'm sure you've seen this too on Instagram, where it's like these people are like, oh yeah, we're gonna host like a mindset coaching thing, like seminar. And it's like, okay, dude, like you probably read like, I don't know, you probably read like some cliche self-improvement book, and you're like, all right, we're just gonna, which whatever, hey, it's more power to you for, you know, marketing that, but you know what I mean? It's like, because it's so new, like people are trying to like jump on it, and it's like, oh yeah, let me sell this just for like, and it's like, dude, like it's just like bullshit that you've regurgitated through like TikTok or something. Yeah, you know? I mean,
I guess I think about that with like almost any field, which is, you know, that kind of charlatan will come out of nowhere and kind of sell you on some BS, but someone who actually understands it, or at least understands the fundamentals, or has a very good picture, like you said, like reading all those textbooks or whatever you're doing, you kind of just have a little bit of better understanding of like what's actually going on versus, you know, just saying some shit. So how do you kind of implement that into what you do now, and what do you do now?
So now I coach at different gyms.
Okay.
Right, for the time being, and then I also coach online. Like I have clients online, and like I try to do like a hybrid training approach too, where it's like a hybrid business model, I should say, where it's like I like to work with people in person when I can, because I do like that in-person aspect of like actually seeing like clients if I can in person, whether it's like once a week or whatever. And then like the rest of that is like me obviously programming them like online and doing like, you know, like check-ins and all that good stuff. And then I'm hoping with this psychology aspect too, the coaching is long-term. I kind of see it as, I just want to promote like better, I don't know how you word it, but like better, I guess, adherence to like exercise and like learning like and being more in tune with like how people respond. Because like a lot of people, I mean, I know a lot of people, I'm sure you do too, where it's like, you know, they might have like adherence problems to like diet or like to like exercise and to maybe like their approach to training or whatever it is. And I've really want to educate myself further on really trying to make that intersection of really why people might struggle, and then kind of get them better at like tailoring like personal programming and like exercise regimes for people that have these certain, I guess you call it like psychodynamics, and as far as like how they approach training, and like maybe like roadblocks that they have subconsciously that they're not aware of and their approach to training.
Yeah.
But that's kind of like, that's what I want to implement long term. And you know, even though yes, I have like an undergrad in psychology, I'm by no means like a therapist or like a counselor or anything. But I always strive to sort of seek that information and see how I can integrate that information through psychology and whatever it is, and kind of intertwine it with my coaching and my training as well.
I think I even more than like, not necessarily, you're not a psychologist or whatever yet, but I mean the amount of experience, the life experience that you have, and then basically what it sounds like to me is that you're really trying to make it really actually individualized to the person of what they actually need in training, versus just like, all right, well, this 4 days a week, upper, lower, this is what we kind of do here. You can't fit into this mold, then, you know.
Then fuck off.
Yeah, absolutely. On that topic, I do have a couple questions on some of your Instagram posts, and then we kind of can go from there. First one I mentioned a little bit earlier. You said one of the captions of the photo was like, be your own inspiration. And you talked a little bit about, you know, looking up to other people for inspiration, looking for other people's like approval of yourself. What does it mean to have like an approval of yourself, and kind of what were you kind of getting into with that post, or the idea of like you yourself being your own inspiration? Try to throw that on you.
So I think the funny thing about like the fitness industry as a whole, it's like, and I'm totally guilty of this, as you know, I think everyone is to an extent, because I think we're all trying to find our voice in like the void of the fitness social media fucking world. But it kind of seems like, and what I'm trying to steer away from more is like when I had maybe shared ideas, or if I had made like a post or whatever, that I was like trying to like win the approval of like other people, like, oh yeah, like this is so true, dude. But I feel as if the further and further I get away of like trying to win that approval of people, it's like no, dude, like I have so many experiences and like, I guess like firsthand recalls of like shit I've done that I'm glad to share to people, and I'm sure you have too. And I think what I was trying to get to with that post was like, I think it's good to like obviously have like people we look up to and be like, oh, like he's like this guy is like a solid dude. This guy is someone I would like to kind of aspire to be like in the future. Like he's a good role model or whatever. But I feel like people are so caught up in like, and this could go like so far, I have to like beyond this conversation, but like, especially with social media, like people are so caught up with like just constantly consuming and like not really taking the time to like be with yourself more and be like, oh no, like I am like an individual. And this isn't me trying to be like, oh, like everyone's so special, yada yada, but like more so in a sense that like everyone's an individual and everyone has like original thoughts, but I think people are too scared to like bring those out sometimes.
Yeah.
And I think again, it's something that we see a lot like in the fitness industry, like especially because, and this you know, for the sake of the conversation, I won't go too far off track, but this is kind of what I was saying earlier, where it's like I try to be more like creative in how I approach training and approach like solutions to stuff. Like I'm not like, there's nothing wrong with like looking at like resources and using things as like a database kind of thing, but for the longest time I was so like if a client had something wrong with them, I'd always like look, like when I was like more like inexperienced coach, I'd be like, oh well, how to like go on YouTube and like look up stuff, but then it's like, no, dude, like use your like critical thinking skills.
Yeah.
Like even if it's something like out of the box or something that like some people might look at and be like, oh, what the fuck is that? But then it's like, if you trust in your experiences from what's worked and like you trust in your knowledge, then like I don't see why.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I don't see why you can't go outside the box a little bit and
Absolutely.
be original to your thought and execution, like towards coaching.
I feel like, especially now with like as far as training goes, with the rise of like AI apps and things like that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Where it's like everything is so data driven, where it's just like, you know, like if I do this, it's like you plug in X and you get Y automatically, and like that's how people and coaches want to make training now, which is I think obviously extremely beneficial in the sense of you need to be able to progress. Like the name of the game is progression, but humans aren't computers. So then eventually it kind of comes down to like really troubleshooting and like you said, kind of really going down into the critical thinking skills of how to actually help someone solve their problem. And it's not always just you have to squat 2 to 3 times a week in order to see squat progress.
Yeah, and I think too, like I think the funny thing about like the whole AI thing or like the whole like research thing, especially like, and I always get in arguments with people about this, like with when people are like, oh, or like this research said for this study, whatever. It's like, dude, like I don't think people realize like a lot of these studies and research, which is great, but at the same time, it's like a lot of these people will perform these studies, if you want to call it, to like prove their bias and prove their point. It's never to like, and like usually if it's disproven, then like a lot of times it's kind of like it's kind of hush hush. You know what I mean? But it's funny because it makes you think like, yeah, like everyone has their own biases and that's fine. But and like you were saying, I think how like AI is able to program, that's like, I mean, that's, I guess if you're like a raw beginner, that's not the worst thing in the world. But as you get older and training age, and you know, programming and progression might get a little more like complicated.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? Like it's not going to be like a fucking, you're not just going to go on fucking AI and just be like.
Absolutely.
You know, like it's I think it goes a lot deeper in that, and that's kind of, I guess, bringing back to like the point of why I want to integrate that psychology aspect into my coaching is more so because, again, I think there's so much at play with progression that's often not seen.
I think on that, and I was having this conversation with my coach. He said basically at the top, everyone got genetics. Everyone has genetics at the top. Everybody's working hard. Everybody's doing all that. But to me, I feel like, and then maybe everyone's got their nutrition dialed and everything like that. What it ends up coming down to is that mental aspect of the sport. And I don't think it's always just. I think a large part of it is like getting up and doing the thing. Mm-hmm. But I think there is a little bit of it where it's like, how can I look at this maybe more positively or in a different light? Where, to me, maybe this is definitely pseudoscience. But like, I think sometimes the mentality really is what is driving growth. Mm-hmm. I think you can look at things like the placebo effect with like medical studies. How, you take a pill and it's like a sugar pill, but you're still getting the benefits of it, just because your head is thinking so. And to that point, I think too, like a lot of people, either athletes of mine or other athletes, I try to stay away from these people. When they put on like self-limiting ideas, every time I'm like, ooh, like, because I'm like, that's just like a brain rot. I don't want anything to do with, because I want to protect the, that growth mentality that I have. I don't know if you have a similar experience.
What are they posting if you want me asking? Or like, you can set an example. You have to.
You know what it is?
Call it out.
No. I mean, so I've been through a few injuries. Not to go through not going too much in it, but I've been through a few injuries. That was probably some of the most difficult time in my life. I was in high school. I was like really growing from those experiences of overcoming that. The entire time, even when I had doctors telling me I would never be able to like lift again, my parents were telling me I need to go find something else to kind of be passionate about or whatever. That entire time there was something in my head that said, no, I'm going to, I'm going to create this lifestyle and be the person who I feel like, who I truly am, which is a lot of it is just going apeshit in the gym. It is what it is.
Fuck yeah.
So,